Let's look at World War II. Before we start, this is not a deep dive. This will not be in-depth, comprehensive coverage of World War II. I'm just going to give you the outline, the blueprint, the basic beats that you need to know. But the History Channel, there's tons of YouTube videos, tens of thousands of books that go in-depth to World War II from every possible perspective. But I just want to give you what you need to know for that AP test. I can defend, criticize isolationism during the Hitler's militaristic expansion, and then compare and contrast New Deal with Lebensraum. We're going to start out with fascism. This is a big word today, big word then. It's always going to be a big word. What is fascism? There are many varieties of fascism, different brands. There is right-wing fascism that tends to be more racist and nationalist, but there's also left-wing and liberal fascism. Fascism comes in all shapes and forms. But the basics of fascism is this idea that the state, the country, the nation, the goals of the state, nation, country, the goals of the group, the needs of the group are more important than individual rights. That is fascism. And to many extents, we practice fascism from time to time in America. We'll get to that. I know you're saying, I'm not a fascist. The bad guys are fascists. Yes, the bad guys are fascists. Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, absolutely fascists. But there are times in American history where we're fascists too. Because, just understand the definition. The government's going to take away your individual rights for the greater good. The government's going to take away your individual rights, whatever that right is. Speech, privacy, the right to bear arms, whatever individual right it is. At times, our government, and definitely the fascists in Europe during World War II, took away the individual rights of citizens so that this nation could be stronger, so that the country could be stronger. Let's give you a specific example of what could happen today. It's actually what is happening today. This is an argument that often happens in our country. You have the right to own a weapon in America. That is an individual right. It is a Second Amendment right. You have the right to religion, assembly, press, petition, speech. No one thinks the government should take those away. You have the right to bear arms. And some people think, though, the government should take those rights away. And I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. If you believe that, that's fine. And if you don't believe that, that's fine as well. But we all have to agree that this is an example of fascism. I have the right to bear arms to protect myself from a tyrannical government. I also have the right to own a weapon to protect myself from criminals. That is a right established in the Constitution. It's an individual right that cannot be taken away. Just like my right to worship however I choose, my right to assemble, my right to protest, my right to speech, my right to privacy, my right to due process. All of my individual rights, the government cannot take those away. But fascists believe, no. We believe the country should be safer, and the way that we can make the country safer is if we take your gun away. You see many protests like this about taking guns away, but it's for the greater good. And that's fine if you believe it. It is okay to believe that you should suppress individual rights. If you're a fascist, that is a fascist belief. Now, it's not extreme fascism. We're not talking about Hitler and Mussolini, but we're going to the basic idea. Remember, we're not going extreme right wing. We're not going extreme left wing. We just want to understand what is fascism. And it's this idea that the needs of the group, which would be the country, you believe that the country would be safer if we take away people's individual rights to own a gun. This is very common. This is the most common form of fascism that often gets ignored. We think of extreme fascism and extreme racism where millions of people are murdered. And we say, well, that's fascism. No. That is fascism. That is an extreme example, but we use that as an extreme example to justify the smaller versions, which in my part, there is no smaller part. If you take away someone's individual rights for the greater good, you can justify that however you want. You can say, hey, the end justifies the means, and you can take that belief, but you also have to admit that it is fascism. It is fascist to take away someone's individual rights. We have a democracy in America, and there are three parts to a democracy. There's voting, equality, and individual rights. And when you take away individual rights, when you take them away, you are no longer a democracy. You are something else, and you're leaning towards fascism one step at a time. And this is nothing new, and this hasn't happened yet in America. We constantly have this argument, but you look at World War I. We talked about this in the video where people were speaking out against World War I. They're using their freedom of speech to say, we don't believe in this war. No big deal, right? Wrong. The government took away their freedom of speech and imprisoned the people that were speaking out against the war because they argued that, well, when you speak out against the war, you hurt the war effort, you hurt the greater good, you hurt the group, you make it harder for us to win the war. And the needs of the group, the needs of the country, the goals of the nation are more important than your individual rights. After 9/11, the government decided we have to protect the whole country from terrorism. We have to protect everyone. And the only way to protect the nation, the whole, the group, is to take away individual rights. And so they took away your individual privacy rights. And we still do not have those rights today. That, by definition, is fascism. The idea that the needs and goals of the group are more important than individual rights. There's extreme versions of it, but there are even regular versions of it. And you, from time to time, are probably a fascist. You probably say, well, you don't really need to do that. It would be better for the rest of us. The country is more important than individuals. So we'll just look at the roots of the word from the Latin word fasces. Fasces, I'm not Latin. No one's Roman or Latin. Meaning bundle of elm or birch rods or a group. So fasces basically means group. The individual interests would be subordinated to the good of the nation, meaning your individual rights, basically your individual rights, your freedoms of religion, assembly, press, petition, speech, privacy, your right to a trial, right to a speedy trial, right to not be tortured, you name the right. It can be taken away if the government justifies, and often these are autocratic governments, but it can be a government that supposedly is democratic, and they say that the needs of the country are more important than your meaningless rights. And they'll often say, we'll give you the rights back when we take care of this problem. They never give the rights back. They never give the rights back. So imagine there's a war. Well, the country needs to fight the war. And if we're going to fight the war, we need soldiers to fight it. So for the whole country, the group to benefit, we need people to fight. And so the government makes you fight. And you say, but I don't want to. Your individual rights, your individual beliefs, your choices mean less than the group. So you have to fight. Now, more an extreme version there, and we're definitely exaggerating it a little bit, but I'm trying to get you to understand that you as the individual, what you want, what you choose, what you believe, what has been promised to you means nothing compared to the group. That is what fascism is. We have a lighter form of it in America. When we talk about these World War II European nations, we have an extreme version of fascism where more than just individual rights were taken away. People were, murdered for this. So that is fascism. And unfortunately, we often get it wrong. We don't understand fascism. We can look at how journalists covered the rise of Mussolini and Hitler. Reports on the rise of fascism in Europe were not American media's finest hour. So just as today, when I explained the idea about the guns, you probably never thought of, taking guns away from people to protect the greater good. I guess that is fascism, isn't it? Well, I kind of want people to be safe, and I'm worried about school shootings. You are, and that's right to feel that way. But you also have to admit it's fascism. Our media doesn't do a very good job of saying, yes, here's what's happening, but it's also fascism. And they didn't do a good job then either reporting what was going on. Here's the New York Times commonly credited fascism with returning turbulent Italy to what it called normalcy. Well, you know what? They're suppressing the rights. They're taking away the rights of the Italians. But guess what? The country's back to normal. So it's okay. It's okay to use fascism as long as, you get the country back together. Take people's rights away, kill people, suppress them, lock them in jail, tell them to shut up. It's okay as long as the country is still, moving along and everything's fine. That's the New York Times saying that. Part of you says, I cannot believe the New York Times said this and justified fascism. But other parts can say, I can completely understand that the New York Times justified fascism for the goals of a nation. I mean, imagine the news coming up and saying, sometimes, I've actually messed this. Let me see. There we go. Every once in a while, I mess the graphics up. Sometimes the government has the right to take your individual rights away if it's good to the country. Well, and it seems like an exaggeration. It seems like silly, but you've seen a lot of stuff like this before on the news where they've justified some of the more heinous, autocratic, dictatorial, totalitarian measures by our government to suppress and take away our individual rights because it's for the greater good. And that's fine if you believe in that, but you have to admit that you are also accepting fascism. And while it might be okay today for one specific cause, what's it going to be tomorrow? What rights will they take away for what greater good? All right, so we probably don't want that. All right, so back to World War II and stepping away from fascism. At the end of World War I, they signed the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles pretty much lays all the blame for World War I on Germany, which is fine. The nations had the right to do that. They forced Germany to pay the other nations for the war. They're forced to pay England. They're forced to pay France. They are forced to pay because, hey, Germany, you did all this. This is all your fault. But also, Germany, you lost, so we're going to make you pay. And from one side, you say, well, that makes sense. They lost. And that's fine, and that's acceptable. But you have to really think about what you're doing and what the consequences of your action are if you are a government and you're trying to prevent future wars. Because If you hammer Germany with these punishments, with these severe draconian punishments in the Treaty of Versailles, how do you think the German people are going to feel? When the German people, not only have they lost the war, not only have they been defeated, but oh, by the way, you're now going to have to pay everybody else. So your economy is going to suffer because the money from your country has to flow outward because your country is paying bills. Your government cannot provide resources for the people. Your government cannot provide social programs for the people because a lot of the government's money, a lot of the tax dollars are going to pay for these reparations. It's fair for England to say, you lost, you got to pay. It's fair for France to say to Germany, you lost, we suffered because of you, you got to pay us. It's okay to do that. You are allowed to do that. But you have to understand that when you do that, you're going to create resentment in the German people. The German people are going to resent England. They're going to resent France. They lost the war to them, so they're already not happy. They just lost a war. Do you think they like England? Do you think they like their tax dollars flowing out to England? Do you think that's going to prevent a future war, or do you think that might cause a future war? And that's what the Treaty of Versailles pretty much does. At the end of World War I, we had these draconian or severe, over-the-top punishments on Germany and the German people, and the German people become resentful. The German people resent the rest of the world. So not only do they have these harsh economic punishments, but guess what? The Depression's going to roll in and make those draconian, severe economic punitive measures even worse. Oh, and on top of that, the German people are told that, not only does your economy have to suffer, the rest of Europe, because this is the other countries in Europe bossing them around, they are saying to Germany that you can't create a military either. But which is, again, it makes sense. Don't let them create a military, because with the last military, they started a war. That's fine, but if you're a nation and you need to protect yourself, you kind of need a military. Imagine modern nations telling other nations, sorry, you can't have a military. Yeah, but what if someone attacks us? Telling someone they can't defend themselves. That's what the Treaty of Versailles does. How do you think that affects the psyche of the German people? Do you think the German people are going to be more close to England? Or do you think the German people are going to hate England and hate France and hate America and hate the Allied powers that won in World War I? They're going to hate us. This is a great way to make people hate you. And it's not going to prevent another war. It's going to cause another world war. So just explaining the basic economics, we've looked at this often from the American perspective. Germany sells us goods. We buy shoes from them. We send the money to Germany. They use that money to build more factories and hire more workers, and their economy grows. And the same thing with Germany shipping goods to France. Germany's shipping goods to England. The money flows into the country. It creates factories until the Great Depression. Then we're going to have a situation. So not only is the economy collapsing during the Great Depression, you can rewind and watch the videos that explain that. But if you'll remember the Hawley Smoot tariffs, these countries get this great idea that, what we'll just do is we'll put up trade barriers so that our money doesn't flow out of the country. Well, that's fine, but when everybody puts up trade barriers, the money flows nowhere. So you can't sell to anyone. All global trade is pretty much cut off, and this destroys these economies. Who is Germany going to sell to? Germany was already suffering economically. They were already paying a lot because of World War I. Now, they can't even make money by selling to America. They can't make money from selling to France. They can't make money from selling to England. So if they can't sell to these other countries, their factories are going to shut down. Their people are going to suffer. So imagine you're a German. And we're not going to justify the horrific things that the German people will do under the guidance of the Nazi Party. We're not by any means trying to say, well, of course they committed the Holocaust. They were suffering. No, we're not going there. What we are doing is simply setting the table. We're trying to explain the wave that was building. We're trying to explain the situation of how this anger, this rage, this resentful beliefs inside them start to build up and up and up, and how they could then, go off the rails. Does not justify the actions. These economic ideas, the Treaty of Versailles, and its punitive ways do not justify what will follow. But they definitely contribute to the anger, the rage, and the hate that will build throughout the 1930s and into the 1940s. Real quickly explaining the American plan of how to stimulate the economy during the Great Depression, we would loan money out. Great Depression happens. The New Deal was basically a way to get money to the people. We would stimulate the demand or the aggregate demand or the demand for buying goods, right? We want people to demand goods. We want people to spend more. So if people are going to spend more, they need money. How do we get the money to people if the banks and the factories and everything's shut down? The government's going to pay people to do work. That's the New Deal. That's Keynesian economics. Germany will follow kind of a Keynesian economics plan too, but they will do it in a completely different way. We have a New Deal program to stimulate demand, get money to people. Is the government's going to borrow money? The government's then going to give the money to the people to do public works projects, roads. And Germany will do this too, but Germany will add another element to their stimulation plan. We pay people to build bridges and roads and dams and electrify the Tennessee Valley and paint murals, and we create a lot of different jobs. Germany is going to go in a different route. We'll talk about that in the next video.